When something really crummy happens, a job loss, a health scare, or maybe even a pandemic, people often jump to offer words of encouragement and suggest ways to look on the bright side. They mean well, but for those living through the bad news, such positivity can feel downright toxic. With us to explain, in Boulder, Colorado, Dr. June Gruber, an associate professor of psychology and neuroscience at the University of Colorado and director of the Positive Emotion and Psychopathology Laboratory there. In our nation's capital, Dr. Peter Leo, a registered clinical psychologist at Hunt Club Psychological Services, that's a private family practice, and in Oakville, Ontario, Sydney Loney, a writer and editor who recently wrote about toxic positivity for Chatelaine magazine. And we're delighted to welcome the three of you to TVO tonight. June Gruber, get us started here. Everybody, I think, is familiar with the concept of toxic negativity, maybe not toxic positivity. What's that?
When we think of toxic positivity, really what we're thinking about is the pressure to experience positive feelings or the experience of happiness itself in contexts that really don't align with that. So these can be stressful contexts of loss. And in those contexts, really pushing people to feel positive or forcing positive feelings may actually backfire and harm our own psychological health and well-being.
Peter, can you pick up on that? What's so bad about toxic positivity?
Well, the problem with it is when people go too far and they ignore or dismiss negative emotions. So some people may try to keep things upbeat and happy, but over time, people just feel alienated and maybe not understood and shut down.
Sydney, this is, of course, the exact opposite effect that people who do this want to have. I mean, does intention not count for anything these days?
That's a good question. I mean, it comes from a good place, but I think that it ends up leaving people feeling as though they're not being acknowledged, that their feelings are being minimized, and I think that can be very difficult for people.
Okay, June, you want to give us an example of when this kind of thing might take place?
Certainly. So we found that when people experience emotions, that instead of experiencing a diversity of positive and negative feelings, particularly in times of loss, that people may try to either suppress those emotions or even replace them with positive feelings. Imagine you have a sick relative or friend in the hospital, or you've just lost your job, you're grieving with systemic racism, and experiencing joy and exuberance would be inappropriate, and the pressure to feel it may lead us actually to feel worse and maybe even at greater risk for depression and other mood difficulties.
Well, let's do a real-life example about this. Sydney, you wrote about this in Chatelaine magazine, and you can draw on personal experience for this topic that we're talking about tonight. Give us the example, if you would.
Yeah, that's true. I was diagnosed with breast cancer in the middle of a pandemic, which is not amazing. But I spent a lot of my time trying to reassure everybody around me and myself that everything was fine, that I wasn't worried, that I wasn't upset, so that they wouldn't feel worried or upset either. And it ended up it was exhausting to sort of keep up that facade all the time. And in the end, it always sort of backfires when it finally all sort of comes to a head and you just can't do it anymore. But it's sort of a default defense mechanism, I think. And you're trying to protect yourself as much as you're trying to protect those around you from negative emotions or so-called negative emotions.
What kinds of things did people say to you at the time?
At the time, it was a lot of, at least it was caught early. And of course, my mastectomy was delayed because of the pandemic. And especially, I noticed the toxic positivity afterwards. Before I even knew what it was, I didn't know there was a name for it. I just certainly afterwards when I started doing some research, it all made sense to me. But there was a lot of those comments like, at least, this is terrible, but at least the worst is over now. And it's sort of that at least, I think, those two words together that sort of minimizes the experience and the fallout from that. That's the sort of the most difficult. And when I started doing some research, I realized I was just as guilty of that as everybody, because what do you say? You're trying to avoid those uncomfortable conversations. You're trying to make the other person feel better, and that's sort of what we reach to. It's sort of this ingrained response.
Let me do one more quick follow-up with you, and that is, rather than people saying, well, at least they caught it early, or, at least you're young and you've got a shot to fight back, what should they have said?
I think in doing my research for the piece, I think I actually drew a lot from the psychologists I spoke to, because the one thing that resonated for me was just sort of letting the person, acknowledging that it was okay not to feel okay, and acknowledging that they might have might be feeling differently, and just letting them talk. Sort of just asking, how are you? How are you doing now? And keeping all of the other sort of comments out of the mix.
June, can you build on that? What would be the better thing to say to somebody suffering from a potentially life-threatening situation?
I think the point that would be really appropriate is to normalize negative emotions, that it's completely appropriate and acceptable to feel sad, to feel anxious, to feel frustrated, that these are emotions that are giving us signals about what's going on in our life, and to allow the person to feel those emotions and to process the real stressor in front of them.
That's interesting. So, Peter, the actual pursuit of happiness, which is basically what these comments are intended to do, right? This can be problematic at the end of the day. Fair to say?
For sure, because I think, when you are living in a culture that is always pushing you to better yourself and improve yourself, and when you work hard, you can achieve great success. There can be real strong feeling that you have to keep it positive. You have to keep it upbeat. You have to be strong all the time. And unfortunately, this can really be a problem, because the pursuit of happiness, when it's too far, it can have a dark side where those standards and expectations of yourself could be not realistic, and it can actually harm you greatly over time because of this need to kind of keep it positive. It consumes a lot of energy.
June, can I get you as well on that notion, the obligation of the pursuit of happiness and the consequences thereof?
Absolutely. We've done some research in my lab in collaboration with Brett Ford, who's at the University of Toronto, and Iris Mouse at UC Berkeley, finding that the more people endorse wanting to be happy, or what we call the obsession with the pursuit of happiness, it paradoxically backfires. By that, I mean people end up feeling less happy in positive situations, being with friends, watching positive movies. And in fact, we find the more obsessed people are with pursuing happiness, in and of itself, can actually lead to greater risk for depression and symptoms of bipolar disorder as well.
Peter, do people know this?
I think most people really don't really know this consciously. They're not really aware of what they're doing, because these feelings can be internalized, and maybe people can have these well-meaning beliefs that this is the right way, this is the healthy way, and so even though they're being very toxic, they don't realize it at all.
Well, Sydney, that does raise the question then. If we know that it's actually not the right thing to do, why do we do it?
That's such a good question. It's so hard not to do it. I think that, you have all of those. The reason that these cliches exist, like the whole, keep a stiff upper lip, and always look on the bright side. And, coming from a British background, the whole stiff upper lip thing was deeply ingrained in my psychology. So it was always, you have to be strong, you have to be positive. And also that idea that just no one wants to be around someone who's negative all the time. And I didn't want to feel like people would think that I was complaining, because, no matter how bad it was, there's always someone who has it worse. So there's also that we're always constantly thinking about how we're being perceived by others. And I think that is also part of it.
I should ask you, how are you now anyway?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
Okay, good. Glad to hear. Peter, put us into a common scenario where, let's say a typical married couple, one of them is a very sort of normally chipper, upbeat person. The other person is, just kind of walks around with a cloud over their head all the time. You want to give some advice on how to handle that situation?
Yeah. In that kind of case where one person's more toxically positive and not listening to the other partner, that person who's more upset may be feeling invalidated and dismissed whenever communicating about negative things. So if that pattern continues, that person would feel more unheard and discouraged, and may share less and less of those experiences over time. So the problem is that this can build up slowly over time in a relationship and lead to emotional detachment and serious conflict. So when people are noticing this happening, I think it's really important to improve the emotional communication. Try to recognize when this is happening and try to listen better and really into the other person's experience rather than trying to replace it with your own.
That's the key, eh, June? Listen more, talk less?
Absolutely. And to kind of follow up on that point, we've found that people who have what we call high levels of dispositional positive emotion, people that tend to experience positivity across context, this may actually cause them trouble in relationships where a partner's sharing something negative with you. Imagine your partner has come home from work and had a stressful day or received some bad news about their health. We find that those who continue to have these high levels of positive emotion in those relationship contexts end up misunderstanding their partner. And that can pose obvious concerns for relationship satisfaction and the ability to really connect with others and support them.
Sydney, you researched this for your piece, obviously, for Chatelaine. How far back does this, what do you want to call it, positivity trap, how far back into history does this actually go?
It's funny, it's not a new phenomenon, that's for sure. In one of my sources that I interviewed sort of compared to what we do now on Instagram to, back in 18th century portraits. If you're walking through an art gallery, you can see, a man with his dog and his kids and his wife, and everybody's beautifully dressed. And, as I noted in my article, you don't see, the outdoor plumbing and the smallpox scars. Like, there's this whole idea of creating this fake persona, this artifice of positivity and affluence and happiness. If you go through any Instagram feed, you won't see people most of the time where it's very curated, and it's a whole sort of, there's a lot of artifice in this world that we create online for others to see. And I think that we do that ourselves as well, and it goes back for forever.
I don't necessarily want you to throw any of your family or relatives under the bus here, but I am going to ask this question anyway. I mean, you mentioned a few moments ago you got this sort of British stiff upper lip thing going on in your family. Did you have it out with any of your family members when you were going through what you were going through?
I just was being, I remember my mom always saying to me, you're always so positive. You're always so upbeat about everything. And I even felt hesitant to tell my mom, who I'm very close to, how I was feeling. And she's always been very strong growing up. Even when I never knew when times were bad, even when they were bad, because she hid everything. And so I think that has sort of, I've inherited that. And I never really had it out with anybody. I just found myself doing the same thing with my kids and my family.
It's just occurred to me, we should have invited your mom to come on the show too and get her side of the story, just in case the daughter
She would have killed me.
Yeah, well, let's not have any of that. Okay, June, pick up the story from this angle. Social media, of course, has a profound impact on everything today, usually negative. I shouldn't say that, but it feels like it so much of the time. What has social media done to the topic we're discussing tonight?
I think social media is complex, right? Because as you said, there's a duality to it. There are ways that it, especially in times of physical separation, can give us some sense of being connected to others. But I think the dark side or downside of it when it comes to positivity is creating unrealistic standards for how we ought or should be feeling right now. People are posting images of smiling with their friends or their family, or going out and doing fun things, winning awards, humble bragging, all these sorts of things. And it creates what we call a kind of discord, because we're engaging in social comparison. And those social media images are setting up standards for how we think we should be feeling. And that's not always positive.
It does, Peter, though, put people in a difficult spot. If they've got a birthday or an anniversary, or their kid does something well and they do want to boast/share the news with other people, I don't know, is there a way to do that that doesn't overdo what we're talking about here?
Well, I think if you're really careful to speak to your own experience and your personal experience, and you're not really trying to make a larger statement, everyone's entitled to share what they're really going through. And some of that is positive. So naturally, I think sharing that is fine. But I think if you're sharing that all the time, if you're feeling a compulsion to present this false facade in your relationships with other people online, that can lead to a very toxic pattern.
I should ask Sydney, the experience you went through with cancer, how much of that did you share on social media, and what kind of feedback did you get to it, and was it ultimately helpful or not to you?
I actually hadn't told a lot of friends and family. It wasn't something I wanted to talk about when I got my diagnosis. So I did end up writing a piece about it when the surgery was canceled, just because I felt it was something that people needed to know about. Because at that time, this was early on in the pandemic, we didn't know about elective surgeries being canceled. And that was how a lot of my friends and family found out, which kind of ripped the Band-Aid off on that one. After that, I didn't post on social media about it. I posted one short post when I got back from the hospital, and that was it, just sort of to let some of my immediate friends, people who I had so many well-wishers, so I wanted to sort of let them know without making a big deal out of it, but that was it.
Well,
and the response was wonderful. People were lovely.
Oh, good. We've mentioned this article that you wrote for Chatelaine a number of times right now, so why don't we go back to February 9th, 2021. Sheldon, I'll ask you to bring the graphic up, and I'll read along. Here's an excerpt from that piece. The term toxic positivity isn't bandied about much in academic circles, but there are other names for it, like unrealistic optimism. It isn't just an individual problem. As a society, we collectively like to pretend things are fine, which can invalidate the severity and complexity of serious situations. There's plenty of invalidating going on amid the pandemic. The "we're all in this together" mantra that surfaced early on during the global crisis is both misleading and harmful. Okay, Sydney, pick up the story there, because I know I think there got to be a moment in this pandemic when, people said, we're all in this together. If I hear that one more time, I'm going to smack somebody, type of thing. Did that get to you as well?
It did, and it's funny. I drove down the road the other day, and I still saw people on billboards, and companies are still posting those kinds of messages and platitudes. And I think it's dangerous because we're not all in this together. We're not all in the same situation. There are so many people who, like I said in my article, if you've lost your job, it's not like you suddenly have this wonderful newfound leisure time to perfect your sourdough starter. It started to feel as though, it was really glossing the surface and putting everybody in the same sort of boat, same situation, when it's just so not the case. And there's so much disparity in terms of how the pandemic has affected people. And I think that's where it really sort of went awry.
June, what do you see in particular during this pandemic in terms of toxic positivity?
I think I see the failure to embrace a diversity of emotions, acknowledging that everyone may be feeling different things, and in particular, glossing over those people who at times may be experiencing profound levels of disruption, of stress, of anxiety, and of hopelessness. It may be glossing over the global mental health crisis that we're facing right now.
Peter, how about you on that same question?
I would say that what I'm seeing in my practice is that a lot of people are experiencing more stress than ever because the pandemic has forced people into close quarters, living together, spending more time together, and this heightens areas of tension and conflict. So also people are being oversaturated with bad news, and this is really hard to cope with, and some people just overcompensate with positivity.
I wonder, Peter, if there's an issue about not nipping this in the bud, the next generation down tends to model the behavior of the previous generation. So will this just go on and on and on until we recognize and do something about it?
Well, it could, in fact, and that's what I'm worried about. But I believe that, all people can change and grow. And I think the best way that people can kind of grow out of this pattern and shift their thinking is by listening better and validating people's emotional experiences and being able to talk about and listen to the full range of human emotion. All that richness and connection helps people actually to cope better with adversity. So I think there's a way through this.
Sydney, there's an expression you use. You call yourself a reformed positivity pusher. What do you mean by that?
I mean that I was very one of those people who would do all of the things we've been talking about today. And when trying to make people feel better, I would use all the same platitudes and try to be, yes, this happened, but hey, look at this. And I think now that I'm much more aware of not doing that, and I think that's important for people to consider, is just that self-awareness that that isn't always the best best answer to somebody or the best response to a difficult situation.
June, how hard a habit is this to break?
I think it's not as hard to break as we think it might be. And in fact, the more we educate ourselves and others that what's healthiest for our minds, our emotional ecosystem, you could call it, is diversity, and that emotions aren't things to be pushed away or to try to promote in an unhealthy manner, but simply information about our world, that might change the lens through which we think about what emotions are and why we have them in the first place.
Let me follow up with you on this, June, because I know as people are watching or listening to this right now, they're probably saying to themselves, how do I navigate this very tough tightrope of not wanting to be overly positive, but on the other hand, you know, if somebody was facing a fatal illness, you wouldn't want to say to them, in order to avoid being toxically positive, well, I guess your chances aren't going to be too good on this, are they? So where do you find the sweet spot?
I think you're right that finding that emotional balance is challenging, but I think we got to take it one step at a time and really one moment at a time. And as we're living through this pandemic, in those challenging moments, as you mentioned, a friend going through a really challenging time, to be able to acknowledge this duality that you can feel both positive and negative at the same time, and that your feelings may change one day to the next, and that our emotions are complex, and that there's no one right emotion at any particular time, but that we need to adapt and embrace all the diverse emotions, because we actually know that diverse emotions, rather than positive emotions alone, are better predictors of our mental and mood health in the long run.
I do get that now, but Peter, I wonder if there's a concern about embracing the negative side of emotions too much, and you end up being a depressed person yourself, which obviously defeats the purpose of the whole thing.
Yeah, certainly that can happen. And when you get in a negative cycle, this is further compounded when you are experiencing fight or flight. You know, you are literally threatened and you're thinking more about these terrible things, and you can be locked in these cycles for a very long time. So I think it's important to remain balanced and accept the whole of people's experience, the light and the dark, like was spoken about earlier. So in a way, you can avoid kind of going to extremes if you're just listening to yourself and being very aware of what's happening inside you and self-correcting.
June, I wonder if, could you give us some advice on this? Is the advice different for somebody who is facing a health challenge versus a job loss versus, look, I've seen some people, you know, when their team loses the night before, they come into work all mopey and depressed the next day. You know, 3 levels of unhappiness, obviously of varying degrees. Is the advice the same in each case?
I think the advice that would be consistent across these circumstances is one, to accept that you may have negative emotions, right? Rather than criticize yourself or blame yourself, know that that's completely appropriate. And they may be different, of course, levels of negative emotion, depending on how stressful the situation is. But that having negative emotions and accepting them does not prevent you from also finding ways to cope and move forward and confront the challenges to the best of your ability.
Sydney, we'll give you the last word on this. Advice for those watching right now?
I think I like that idea of accepting and acknowledging those emotions. I think that's one thing that I've learned. Initially I would do anything but be alone with my thoughts. So I kept myself busy and distracted and pretending things were fine. And then in the end, it made it very difficult and it was exhausting. So I think do yourself a favor and, acknowledge those emotions and look at them and appreciate them, value them as much as the positive ones.
Did you come to any conclusions, incidentally, about whether men or women are worse at this?
Oh, actually, no. I think it's fairly even across the board.
Good. We like equality. That's Sydney Loney. You can look for her piece in Chatelaine magazine. Peter Leo is here from the nation's capital, and June Gruber. We thank you for joining us from the University of Colorado in Boulder. Great to have you 3 on TVO tonight. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.